In this video, we're gonna start to concentrate on rendering and render setup in VRAY for 3ds Max. In the previous video, we talked about the effects that we can get with materials, some extra effects like the displacement right here. So you can see that this is not a fake 3D effect like the bump or the normal, but it's extrusion, a geometry that has been extruded from the texture, creating that really realistic brick wall right there. And also we talked about RM4 and how to use opacity, how to create decals and apply them onto surfaces on top of other materials. So we discover that many effects for materials, they're gonna create more realistic look to your scene, but also they're going to be heavier to render, like the carpet here with the hair and fur and the statue with the hair and fur there. But other effects like opacity will help you to optimize your scene and make it less heavier, like the opacity channel and the bump or the normal. So you need to decide whether to use more heavier effects or less heavier effects depending on the need, depending on your scene. Now in this video we're going to start to talk about rendering more in focus because we can now move on to the final part of this course, which is dedicated to rendering. And we're gonna do many examples. We're gonna start with the simplest way you can render, and we will also talk again about a little bit about materials and environment, texture, and also decals. So everything we learned so far with materials is going to be helpful also in the final part dedicated to the rendering. And by the way, you can use these also to create packaging, to create also a studio setup, as we did previously when we set up a studio to create some like marketing or photography, industrial design, rendering. So this was like a complex combination of lights, like the three-point lighting system that helped us to generate this pretty realistic scenario here. So this was a really simple studio, but the problem here is that we had like black environment around, and this is not pretty realistic in reflections. So what we're gonna see here is our first technique to create renders, which is taking care of all the issues that we had before, like the black background and reflections, and it's the quickest way and the simplest way to create a render for an object. So we're gonna do three examples. The first is gonna be on an object, the second on a exterior, the third one is gonna be for an interior. So I'm gonna run Chaos Cosmos here and directly set up VRAY, opening up the Chaos Cosmos. I'm gonna start to add some people inside my scene. And you can use this technique for one subject, but you can also add a couple of more subjects. It's gonna work fine. So it can be also a more complex scene, but this is intended to have a small scene. So we're gonna add just a few objects here from Chaos Cosmos just to be quick. And as usual, we're gonna start from zero and then we're gonna build up our scene little by little, and we're gonna run the tests here that are gonna show us our progress in the history panel in the VRAY frame buffer. So I'm gonna run a first render, and as usual, everything is totally black. So this is the first thing we get when we run the first render, and then we're gonna activate already the environment. So the first technique here that we're gonna see called Hdri and IBL to render a single object is based mainly on the environment texture or environment map. And if you set it to total white, you can see you have this uniform lighting, you have these uniform shadows, you don't have sharpened shadows and so on. So you don't have reflection as well. So I'm gonna add here some reflective object. So I'm gonna get some props or assets that contain some reflective materials in it, like this candle here. It's gonna be good for what we need to do. But we're also gonna make more examples later with some vehicle, some industrial design object. So I also added a couple of plants, a couple of vegetation there, and with the bases that are gonna be also reflective. But you can see here I cannot really see some really nice reflections because yeah, I changed the background. Now it's not black, it's white, but still we are having this really low quality, this really simplified reflections around, and also the background looks like a studio setup already, but it's not so complex, it's not so detailed. So I'm gonna add the HDRI lighting system, or IBL, which means image-based lighting, to lighten up my scene and create more realistic background, more realistic lighting, and a more realistic reflection. So if we search for environment texture on the web, we're gonna find a lot of these pretty strange images. They look like spheres that have been like rubbed out or they've been flattened out. And these are environment textures. Now they have this look, this spherical look, because they are actually gonna be applied on a sphere that's gonna go around our scene, and it's going to constitute our background. It's gonna be the scenario that we're gonna use on the background. So it's gonna help us to create quickly a context, a scenario for our scene without actually the need to model the entire scene. So we're just gonna need an image. Now this technique is called IBL, image-based lighting. So it means that I'm gonna use an image to have the background there and also to illuminate the scene from every direction. You can see it works similarly to the dome light that we saw before. In fact, you can use an HDRI also with a dome light. So it's gonna illuminate coming from every direction towards the center of our scene, which is probably the position of our subject. And you can see right away what's the difference between using or not using this technique in many examples on the web. Now HDR means high dynamic range, and this is a particular technology used in photography where we can capture more information about lighting and shadows. And so this is where this technique is taking the name from. And HDRI, it means high dynamic range image. And if again we're gonna search for images here, we're gonna find the same exact look of the environment texture. So the HDRI, or high dynamic range image, is actually an environmental image that is gonna be again placed around our scene, kind of like a sphere surrounding everything. So it's gonna give us a context, and I can change context by changing the HDRI. I can create an interior rendering, I can create exterior rendering, I can create a studio rendering, and so on. Now I'm gonna go back to polyhaven.com, which is an excellent website. It's gonna give you a lot of HDRIs. You can find HDRIs in Cosmo browser also, but here we're gonna make this manually. So I'm gonna go to Polyhaven. You can see we have a lot of studio setup here that we can start with, and then we're gonna see some exterior and interior ambientation as well. So choose the quality. 4K will be really good because it's not gonna be blurred on the background. Try not to get too small images, otherwise you're gonna see pixels. So I usually go for the 4K, but you also have higher resolution for these HDRIs. And I'm showing you here different HDRIs, like with different lighting. So you have daylight, you have sunset, you have night scene, day scene. So you can also, by changing the HDRI, you can change also the time of the day. So let's go back into 3ds Max and let's start working here with this HDRI. I've created a folder where I store all my HDRI here. You can see the file format is HDR, and this is the most popular format that you can use. And so I'm gonna start with this studio